The message came on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. Deep in the cold black of space, far from Earth and far from anything that felt like home, a beautiful green planet called New Busan floated quietly around its sun. It was not a rich planet. It was not a powerful planet. It was a farming world, full of wide golden fields and small towns, and children who played in the red dirt after school. 17 other human colonies depended on its food. Millions of people ate because New Busan grew rice and wheat and vegetables in soil that was somehow even better than Earth's. Baek Jeon was a school teacher there. She was 31 years old, not very tall, and she wore her hair in a simple ponytail every day. She loved her students. She loved the way the sky turned orange in the evening, and the way the wind smelled like fresh grain. She had come to New Busan 6 years ago because she wanted a quiet life, and she had found one. That quiet life ended when the Droven arrived. The Droven collective was not one species but 6, bound together by greed and power. They controlled trade routes across half the galaxy. They did not conquer planets with weapons. They conquered them with money, with threats, with slow strangulation. They would blockade a world, cut off its supplies, and wait until the people inside were desperate enough to sign anything. They had done it dozens of times to dozens of species. It always worked. No one ever fought back, because fighting the Droven meant fighting their allies, their banks, their trade networks. It was easier to just give in. Their ambassador was a creature called Grelt. He was tall, insectoid, with 6 arms, and black eyes that reflected light like wet stones. He sat aboard his flagship above New Busan and looked down at the planet, the way a landlord looks at a property he already owns. He had done this many times before. He knew how it would go. The humans would protest, then they would send diplomats, then they would argue for weeks, and then they would sign a deal that gave the Droven most of what they wanted. That was how every species behaved. That was how the galaxy worked. Grelt sent his ultimatum to Earth's government, the United Earth Council. His demands were simple: 60% of New Busan's harvest every year, exclusive mining rights to its 3 moons, a permanent Droven trade office on the planet's surface. And if the humans refused, the blockade would remain. No food would leave. No supplies would enter. The people of New Busan would slowly starve, and the 17 colonies that depended on them would starve too. He sent the message and leaned back in his chair. He expected a response in a few days, maybe a week. Humans were talkers after all. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. On Earth, the message arrived at the United Earth Council's headquarters in Geneva at exactly 6 in the morning. Within 20 minutes, every council member was awake. Within 30 minutes, they were all in the same room. The room was underground, windowless, and lined with screens showing the Droven blockade. 80 warships arranged in a ring around New Busan, like a noose. The council members looked at the screens. They looked at each other. Some of them were angry. Some of them were afraid. But all of them had read the same history books. All of them knew what the Droven had done to the Polari, a peaceful species that had accepted a similar deal 20 years ago. The Polari were now little more than servants in their own homes, their worlds stripped bare, their children working in Droven factories. The council did not argue for long. They did not draft a counteroffer. The vote was unanimous, and it took less than 40 minutes from the moment the first council member sat down to the moment the order was signed. It was the fastest executive decision in the history of the United Earth Council. The order was classified at the highest level. It was sent on a secure channel that most of Earth's own military did not even know existed. It traveled across encrypted relays, bounced through hidden satellites, and arrived at a small, unremarkable terminal inside Lunar Command, a gray building on the surface of Earth's moon. Captain Yoon Do-hyun was eating breakfast when his terminal beeped. He was a man of 43 with a calm face and steady hands. He never rushed. He never raised his voice. People who served under him said that he could be standing in the middle of a fire and he would still finish his sentence before moving. He picked up the message, read it once, and set down his spoon. His aide, Lieutenant Park Soo-jin, was sitting across from him. She was 28, sharp-eyed, and one of the best systems officers in the fleet. She noticed immediately that something had changed. Do-hyun's face was the same. It was always the same. But his eyes had gone still in a way she had never seen before. "Sir?" she asked. Do-hyun stood up slowly. He folded his napkin, placed it on the table, and looked at her. "Wake the fleet," he said. Soo-jin blinked. In 3 years of serving under Do-hyun, she had never heard those words. She had trained for them. Every officer at Lunar Command had trained for them. Hearing them spoken out loud, in a quiet cafeteria, on a Tuesday morning, was something else entirely. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Yes, sir." Do-hyun walked to the bridge without looking back. His steps were even, unhurried. But inside his chest, something old and heavy had begun to turn. Something that humanity had carried for a very long time, buried deep, kept quiet, hoped never to use. On New Busan, Jiyeon stood outside her school and watched the Droven ships crawl across the sky like dark insects. Her students were inside, confused and scared. Other teachers had already packed their bags. Evacuation shuttles were being prepared. A colleague asked her if she was coming. Jiyeon looked at the sky for a long moment. Then she turned around and walked back into her classroom. "No," she said. "Someone has to stay." She did not know what was coming. Not the colonists, not the Droven, not the dozens of alien species watching from Threshold Station with mild curiosity, already placing bets on how much the humans would give up. They all expected a negotiation. They were all wrong. Past Neptune, past the last place where sunlight still meant something, there was a region of space so dark and so empty that even Earth's own star charts marked it simply as Dead Zone. No trade routes passed through it. No colonies had ever been built there. Scanners found nothing but cold rock and silence. That was exactly the point. Hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid the size of a small moon, surrounded by sensor-blocking fields and cloaked behind layers of technology that had taken 60 years to perfect, sat the Black Cradle, humanity's most guarded secret. From the outside there was nothing to see. From the inside, it was a cathedral of war. The cavern stretched for kilometers in every direction, its walls lined with construction bays, fuel depots, and ammunition stores. Docking arms held warships in rows, like sleeping giants. The air hummed with the deep vibration of reactors kept on standby, waiting for a command that many hoped would never come. For over 100 years, humanity had built this place in silence. Every generation added to it. Engineers came, served their time, and left without ever telling their families where they had been. Entire careers were spent in the dark, building something that the galaxy was never supposed to see. The fleet that lived inside the Black Cradle had a name. They called it the Harang Fleet, from an old Korean word meaning a voyage to the sky. 47 capital warships, 200 escort destroyers, 12 carriers, each one large enough to hold a small city inside its belly. And at the very center of the formation, locked into the largest docking bay, was the pride of everything humanity had ever built for war. The HSS Taejo, 5 kilometers long, matte black from bow to stern. Rail cannons lined its spine like the teeth of some ancient predator. Directed energy weapons sat in clusters along its flanks. Its armor plating was layered so thick that engineers joked it could fly through a sun and come out the other side, looking annoyed. Painted on its hull, just below the bridge, was a single emblem, a white tiger with its mouth open, frozen mid-roar. The Taejo had never fired a shot in anger. None of the Harong fleet had. They existed only as a promise that if the day ever came when talking was not enough, humanity would not be caught helpless. That day had come. Rear Admiral No Eunji stood in her quarters aboard the Taejo and read the activation order on her personal screen. She was 56 years old, lean and straight-backed, with silver streaks in her black hair and a face that gave away nothing. In 30 years of service, she had commanded every type of vessel the fleet had. She had won every war game, every simulation, every theoretical engagement ever designed to test her. Officers half her age studied her tactics in school. She read the order twice, then closed her screen and sat in the dark for exactly 1 minute. She was not thinking about strategy. She was thinking about a boy named No Kyung-woo, her younger brother, who had been 12 years old when a pirate raiding party hit the colony where their family lived. Earth had no fleet to send back then. No warships, no soldiers. Just a distress signal that echoed into empty space until someone finally came, 3 days too late. Kyung-woo did not survive those 3 days. Eunji had been 19 at the time. She enlisted the next morning. She had spent every single day since then making sure that no one would ever send a distress call that went unanswered again. She stood up, straightened her uniform, and walked to the briefing room. Her 3 division commanders were already waiting. Commander Kang Tae-ho stood near the door with his arms crossed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and restless, the kind of officer who smiled when things got dangerous. He led the strike division, the fast attack ships designed to hit hard and move fast. Commander Shin Hae-yoon sat at the table with her hands folded. She was quiet, patient, and impossible to rattle. She led the shield division, the carriers and heavy escorts whose job was to protect everything behind them. And Commander Bae Jin-so leaned against the far wall, half hidden in shadow. He was thin, pale, and so still that people sometimes forgot he was in the room. He led the Ghost Division, the electronic warfare and stealth ships that moved unseen and knew everything. Eunji looked at each of them. She did not give a speech. She did not raise her voice. She simply said what needed to be said. The Draven Collective has blockaded New Busan, 80 warships, 12 million civilians on the surface. The Council has authorized full fleet deployment. She paused. We jump to the threshold system. We do not negotiate. We do not posture. We arrive, and they understand. Tae-ho grinned. Hae-hoon nodded once. Jin-seo said nothing, but his eyes moved to his datapad, and his fingers were already working. Within the hour, the Black Cradle came alive for the first time in its existence. Lights that had been dim for decades blazed to full power. Docking clamps released with deep metallic groans. Fuel lines disconnected in bursts of frozen gas. Across hundreds of ships, crews ran to their stations, pulling on uniforms and strapping into chairs. Captain Yoon Do-hyun arrived on the bridge of the Taejo and took his place at the tactical station. His hands moved across the console with the calm precision of a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. Beside him, Lieutenant Park Soo-jin ran final diagnostics on the ship's sensor array, her fingers fast and sure. When she finished, she reached into her jacket pocket and took out a small photograph. Her parents, standing in front of their house on Earth, smiling in the sunlight. She looked at it for a moment, then placed it carefully on the edge of her console where she could see it. Do-hyun glanced at the photo, but said nothing. All across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Engineers whispered prayers over reactor cores. Pilots kissed the noses of their fighters for luck. A medic aboard one of the carriers sat alone in the medical bay, organizing supplies with shaking hands that slowly became steady. They were afraid. Of course they were afraid. But they were also ready, and they had been ready for a very long time. Admiral Yunji's voice came through every speaker on every ship, calm and clear as morning water. All ships, this is the Admiral. Set course for the threshold system. Formation crescent. Jump on my mark. She paused, and in that pause, 50,000 men and women held their breath. Mark. The Black Cradle's massive blast doors opened for the first time, revealing the cold stars beyond. And one by one, then in groups, then all at once, the harangue fleet lit its engines and vanished into hyperspace. A stream of blue-white light pouring out of the dark like a river that had been dammed for a century and was finally set free. The asteroid went dark again. The silence returned. But the galaxy would not be silent for much longer. Ambassador Grelt was eating when the screaming started. He was aboard his flagship, the Drovan command vessel called the Iron Demand, sitting at a table covered with imported delicacies from 3 different star systems. He ate slowly and with great satisfaction, because Grelt was a creature who enjoyed the feeling of winning, and he was winning. He had been winning since the moment his fleet arrived at New Busan. 3 days had passed since his ultimatum. Earth had not responded. No diplomats, no counter-offers, no angry messages, just silence. Grelt took this as a sign of confusion and fear. He had seen it before in other species, the quiet panic of a people realizing they had no good options. They would come around soon. They always did. He was halfway through a piece of roasted something when his sensor officer, a nervous young Drovan at the far end of the bridge, made a sound that Grelt had never heard before. It was not a word. It was not a report. It was a high, thin noise, the sound of a person whose brain had seen something that it could not yet process into language. Grelt looked up, annoyed. "What is it?" The sensor officer turned to him. His black eyes were wide, and his 6 arms were shaking. "Hyperspace signatures," he whispered. "On the system edge." Grelt set down his fork. "How many?" The officer looked at his screen. He looked back at Grelt. He looked at the screen again, as if hoping the number would change. 112. For 3 full seconds, the bridge of the Iron Demand was perfectly silent. Then every alarm on the ship went off at once. They came out of hyperspace together. Not in ones or twos, not in staggered groups. All of them, all 112 ships, dropped into real space at the exact same instant, in the exact same formation. A perfect crescent that curved across the void like a blade. No species in recorded galactic history had ever performed a synchronized fleet jump of that size. The calculations alone should have taken months. The coordination should have been impossible. Fleet jumps were messy, imprecise things. Ships arrived early or late, scattered across thousands of kilometers, needing time to reform. The Harang fleet arrived as one. Not a single ship was out of position. At Threshold Station, the great neutral space station that orbited at the edge of the system, dozens of alien diplomats and traders stood at the observation windows and watched in disbelief. They had come to watch the Drovan squeeze another concession out of another young species. Instead, they were watching the largest military deployment they had ever seen materialize out of nothing. A trade attaché from the then hegemony dropped his drink. A diplomat from the Selen Republic sat down very slowly, as though his legs had simply stopped working. A military observer from a species called the Peleki was already recording everything with shaking hands, whispering into his device. Where did they come from? Where did they build all of this? Nobody had an answer. At the center of the crescent sat the HSS Tejo. It was so large that it looked less like a ship and more like a piece of a planet that had decided to move. Its black hull absorbed the starlight around it, making it appear as a hole in space, a shadow with engines. Every weapon port was open. Every fighter bay was lit from within, revealing rows upon rows of combat craft ready to launch. The white tiger on its hull seemed to glow against the dark. On the Taijo's bridge, Admiral No Unji stood with her hands clasped behind her back and watched the Drovan fleet on the main screen. 80 ships. She had brought more than enough. Captain Dohyun sat at his tactical console, calm and focused, tracking every Drovan vessel. Lieutenant Sujin monitored the communications grid, her eyes scanning data streams faster than most people could read. Unji turned to Sujin. "Open all channels." Sujin's fingers moved. "All channels open, Admiral. Broadcasting on every frequency. They can hear you. Everyone can hear you." Unji stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words were carried on every signal in the system, to the Drovan fleet, to Threshold Station, to the surface of New Busan, to every ship and every ear within range. "This is Rear Admiral No Unji of the United Earth Navy. You have blockaded a human world and threatened human lives. You were given no permission. You were offered no provocation. You have 60 standard minutes to withdraw beyond the system boundary. There will be no second warning. There will be no negotiation." The message ended. The channel stayed open. Silence followed. Aboard the Iron Demand, Grelt stared at the tactical display. The 80 dots that represented his fleet were now surrounded by a crescent of over 100 larger dots. He had commanded blockades against 7 species. He had never once seen the blockaded side arrive with a fleet that outnumbered and outgunned his own. He tried to think. He was a diplomat, not a soldier. He dealt in pressure and patience, not weapons. His first instinct was to open a channel and talk, to negotiate, to buy time, to find out what the humans actually wanted, so he could offer them something small and claim victory. He ordered his communications officer to open a diplomatic channel to the human flagship. The channel did not connect. He tried again. Nothing. He tried a different frequency. Nothing. He tried emergency bands, trade frequencies, even civilian channels. Every single one was dead. Commander Bei Jinseo's Ghost Division had moved into position during the Admiral's broadcast. 14 stealth ships, invisible to Drovan sensors, had positioned themselves throughout the system and activated a communications blanket so complete that the Drovan could not send or receive a single signal that the humans did not allow. The only voice the Drovan could hear was Unji's message playing on a loop. Grelt slammed his 6 fists on the table. He turned to his senior military officer, a veteran ship captain named Vren. Vren was old for a Drovan, scarred from earlier campaigns, and he had been watching the human fleet on his personal screen with an expression that Grelt had never seen on him before. It was fear. "Vren," Grelt hissed. "What are those ships? Where did they come from?" Vren looked at his ambassador with tired eyes. "I do not know where they came from. I do not know how they built them, but I know what I am looking at." "And what is that?" Vren pointed at the Teijo on the screen. "That is a dreadnought-class vessel with more firepower than our entire fleet combined, and it brought friends." He lowered his arm. "Ambassador, we need to leave. Now." Grelt's eyes hardened. "We do not run. The collective does not run. This is a bluff. Humans are traitors, not warriors. They will not fire." He had served long enough to recognize the difference between a bluff and a promise. What he saw on that screen was a promise. But Grelt was the ambassador, and Grelt gave the orders. The clock continued to count down. On the surface of New Busan, Baek Jien stood outside her school as the evening light faded. She had heard the broadcast. Everyone on the planet had. She looked up at the sky, and for the first time in days, she saw new lights among the stars. Not the cold, threatening lights of the Drovan ships. These were different. These were brighter, and there were so many of them. She did not know what they were, but she felt something she had not felt in 3 days. She felt hope. Around her, colonists were coming out of their homes, looking up. Some were crying. Some were holding each other. A little boy in her class tugged on her sleeve and pointed at the sky. "Teacher, whose ships are those?" Jian wiped her eyes and smiled. "Ours," she said. "Those are ours." Above them, the 60-minute clock continued to tick. 55 minutes. 50. 45. The Drovan did not move. The Harong fleet did not move. The galaxy held its breath, and the stars watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen when the clock reached 0. The clock hit 58 minutes, and the Drovan still had not moved. Aboard the Taincho, Captain Dohyun watched the countdown on his display with steady eyes. Around him, the bridge crew worked in focused silence. No one spoke unless they had something to report. No one needed to. They had trained for this. Every drill, every simulation, every late night spent running scenarios in their heads. It had all been for a moment exactly like this one. Admiral Yunji stood at the center of the bridge, watching the Drovan formation on the main screen. 80 ships, still holding position around New Busan. She could see them clearly now, each one tagged and tracked by Sujin's sensor grid. She knew their shield strengths, their weapon capacities, their engine outputs. She knew which ones were old and which ones were new. She knew which captains were scared and which ones were stubborn. And they knew nothing about her. At the 59-minute mark, something changed on the Drovan side. 10 warships broke away from the main formation and began moving forward, not retreating, but advancing, pushing toward the Harong fleet's crescent line in an aggressive posture. Their weapons were charging. Their shields were up. Dohyun looked at his screen. 10 contacts moving forward. Weapons hot. Unji did not blink. Ambassador Grelt is testing us. He thinks we are bluffing. Orders, Admiral? Unji turned to the communications panel. Connect me to Commander Kang. Taeho's face appeared on a small screen beside her. He was already in his command chair aboard the strike cruiser Chenma. And he was smiling the way a man smiles when he has been waiting for something for a very long time, and it has finally arrived. Commander, Unji said, 10 targets moving forward. Disable them. 0 casualties. Understood, Admiral. 0 casualties. Give me 90 seconds. He cut the channel, and the strike division moved. It happened so fast that the aliens watching from Threshold Station would later argue about the exact sequence of events. Recordings would be played and replayed thousands of times across the galaxy, slowed down frame by frame, studied by military academies of every species for decades to come. And every time, the conclusion was the same. The humans were impossibly, terrifyingly precise. 24 fast-attack frigates from Taeho's division broke from the crescent and swept forward in a formation that looked almost like flowing water. They did not fly in straight lines. They curved, they split, they reformed, each one moving in perfect coordination with the others, as though they shared a single mind. The rail cannons fired first, not at the Drovan hulls, not at their bridges or their crew quarters. The shots hit engine mounts, the exact bolts and brackets that connected the engines to the ship frames. The precision was surgical. Each shot severed the connection without piercing the hull, without hitting a fuel line, without causing a single explosion. 10 ships, 20 engine mounts, 20 perfect shots. Before the Drovan crews could even process what had happened to their engines, the second wave hit. Directed electromagnetic pulses struck each ship in sequence, perfectly timed and perfectly targeted. Power grids collapse. Lights went out. Weapon systems died. Navigation screens went dark. In the span of a few heartbeats, 10 warships went from combat-ready to floating metal. Then came the third wave. Small boarding drones, no bigger than a person, launched from the frigates and latched onto the disabled ship's airlocks. They did not cut through. They did not force entry. They simply overrode the lock codes, which Commander Bei Jinseo's Ghost Division had already cracked during the first 60 minutes, and opened the doors. Non-lethal suppression gas flooded through the corridors. Within minutes, every Drovan soldier on those 10 ships was unconscious but breathing, unharmed but utterly helpless. 90 seconds, 10 warships, 0 deaths. Commander Kang Taeho leaned back in his chair and opened a channel to the Taejo. Strike Division reports all 10 targets disabled, no casualties on either side. He paused. Requesting permission to do that again, Admiral. That was fun. Eun-ji did not smile, but something in her eyes softened for just a moment. Stand by, Commander. The remaining 70 Drovan ships had gone completely still. Not one of them moved. They had just watched their 10 strongest warships get taken apart like toys by a force that moved faster than anything they had ever seen. And they had not been able to fire a single shot in return. On the bridge of the Iron Demand, Grelt stood frozen. His 6 arms hung limp at his sides. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. The tactical display in front of him showed 10 of his ships as dark, dead icons, surrounded by human vessels that were already pulling back to their original positions as though nothing had happened. Vren stood beside him. The old captain's face was gray. He turned to Grelt slowly. Ambassador, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I told you, that was not a bluff. Grelt said nothing. The second phase began without warning. Commander Shin Hyun's shield division moved forward. Not fast, not aggressively, but with the slow, inevitable weight of a wall being built. Carriers and heavy escorts positioned themselves in a solid line between the Drovan fleet and New Busan. 300 fighters launched from the carrier bays and took formation, hovering in perfect rows like a fence made of light and metal. The message was clear. Even if the Drovan wanted to reach the planet, they would have to go through a barrier that made their own fleet look like paper. And then Commander Bei Jinseo delivered the final blow, not with weapons, but with information. Every intercepted Drovan communication from the last 60 minutes was broadcast on open channels. Every species at Threshold Station heard it all. Grelt screaming at his officers to find a way to jam the human communications. Grelt demanding to know why his intelligence service had no information about the human fleet. Grelt calling the humans primitive, calling them weak, calling them cattle. His officers arguing with each other, contradicting each other, panicking. The Drovan collective's carefully built image, the image of calm, powerful, untouchable manipulators, collapsed in real time. Every diplomat, every traitor, every military observer in the system heard the fear in their voices, heard the chaos, heard the lies. At Threshold Station, a Polari diplomat, one of the species the Drovan had crushed 20 years ago, listened to the broadcast with tears running down his face. Not tears of sadness, tears of something he had not felt in a very long time. Admiral Eun-ji waited until the broadcast had played for exactly 5 minutes. Then she opened one final channel, directly to Grelt's ship, cutting through Jinseo's communications blanket like a knife through silk. Ambassador, she said. Her voice was calm, even gentle, the way a person speaks to someone who has already lost and simply does not know it yet. Your ships are surrounded. Your communications are ours. Your fleet has been proven inadequate. I have shown you mercy once. I am not required to show it again. Withdraw. The channel closed. Silence. Vren moved first. Without waiting for Grelt's order, he walked to his own command console, opened a channel to his ship, and gave a single command: retreat. His vessel turned and began to move toward the system boundary. Another captain followed, then another, then 5 more. Grelt watched his fleet dissolve around him, ship after ship turning away, engines firing, running from a force they could not match and could not understand. His 6 hands clenched into fists. His pride screamed at him to stay, to fight, to do something. But there was nothing to do. There had never been anything to do. He had walked into a room thinking he was the strongest one there, and he had discovered that he was not even close. All ships, Grelt said, and his voice cracked on the words, withdraw. The Iron Demand turned and followed its fleet into the dark. On the bridge of the Taejo, Lieutenant Park Sujin let out a breath she had been holding for 3 minutes. Her hands were trembling on her console. She looked at the photograph of her parents, still propped against the edge of her screen. And she pressed her fingers to her lips, and then to the photo. Captain Do-hyun glanced at her. For the first time in all the years she had known him, she saw something in his eyes that might have been relief. On the surface of New Busan, Baek Ji-yeon stood outside her school and watched the Drovan ships turn and shrink and vanish from the sky, one by one, like bad dreams dissolving in the morning light. Around her, people were cheering, crying, holding each other. Someone was ringing the old colony bell that had not been rung since the founding day. Ji-yeon did not cheer. She did not cry. She simply gathered her students close, held them tight, and looked up at the stars, where the lights of the herring fleet still burned steady and bright. You see, she whispered to them, they came for us. 1 month later, the galaxy was a different place. It changed not with a war, not with a treaty signed over years of slow negotiation, but with a single afternoon that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. The recordings from Threshold Station had spread to every corner of known space within hours. Every species, every government, every military academy and trading house and back-alley tavern had seen the footage. The synchronized jump, the crescent formation, the 90-second dismantling of 10 warships without a single death, and the voice of a woman who spoke as though she were simply stating the weather, telling one of the galaxy's most feared powers to leave or face the consequences. The footage was played so many times that children on distant worlds could recite Admiral Unji's words from memory. Military strategists studied the strike division's attack patterns until their eyes ached. Engineers from a dozen species tried to reverse engineer how the humans had built a communications blanket that thorough, and none of them could figure it out. But the thing that stuck with people, the thing that diplomats and historians and ordinary citizens talked about most, was not the power, it was the restraint. The humans could have destroyed those 10 ships. They could have killed every Drovan soldier aboard. They had the weapons, the positioning, and every legal justification a species could ask for. The Drovan had blockaded a civilian world and threatened to starve 12 million people, including children. And the humans had responded by putting everyone to sleep. That fact traveled further than any weapon ever could. It said something about humanity that no speech and no treaty could have communicated. It said, we are strong enough to destroy you, and we chose not to. Remember that. At Threshold Station, the halls that had once treated human diplomats as junior partners, politely ignored, given the smallest offices and the worst meeting times, transformed overnight. Every species with an embassy sent new ambassadors. Trade offers arrived by the dozen. Alliance proposals, non-aggression pacts, research partnerships, cultural exchange programs. A species called the Selen, who had not spoken to humans in 15 years due to a trade dispute, suddenly found the dispute resolved, and sent a gift of rare crystals along with a very polite letter. When a human officer walked through the corridors of Threshold now, people stepped aside. Not out of fear, or at least not only out of fear, out of something closer to respect. The kind of respect that comes from realizing you have been looking at someone your whole life and seeing them wrong. The Droven Collective did not survive the month intact. 3 of its 6-member species announced their withdrawal within 2 weeks. They cited many reasons: economic disagreements, philosophical differences, concerns about leadership. But everyone knew the real reason. They had watched Grelt humiliate himself and their entire alliance on an open channel heard by the entire galaxy. They had watched the most powerful fleet anyone had ever seen appear from nowhere and dismantle the Droven's military reputation in 90 seconds. Staying in the collective now meant being associated with weakness and failure, and in a galaxy built on reputation, that was a death sentence. Ambassador Grelt was recalled and removed from his position. His political career ended not with a trial or a punishment, but with something far worse for a creature like him: irrelevance. He was sent to a minor administrative post on a Droven agricultural moon, processing grain shipments. No one spoke his name in the halls of power again. Vren, the old captain, who had been the first to retreat, was chosen as the Droven's new envoy to Earth. It was an unusual choice. Vren was a soldier, not a diplomat. He was blunt, tired, and had no interest in games. But he was also the only Droven officer who had shown good judgment that day, and both sides knew it. When Vren arrived at Earth's embassy on threshold for his first official meeting, he extended his upper right hand. The Droven gesture of genuine respect, not the lower hand that meant political courtesy. The human ambassador, a gray-haired man named O Sunho, took it without hesitation. "Captain Vren," Sunho said, "welcome." "Ambassador O," Vren replied, "I will not waste your time with pleasantries. My people made a mistake. We underestimated yours. I am here to make sure that mistake is never repeated." Sunho studied the old Droven for a moment, then nodded. "Then we will get along fine." On the colony world of Miriam, a small and quiet planet that most maps did not bother to name, Admiral No Unji stood alone in a memorial garden. The garden was simple: a patch of green grass, a few trees, and a row of stone markers bearing the names of people who had died in the colony raid 37 years ago. She found the one she was looking for. It was small, partly covered in moss, and it read simply, "No Kyungwoo, beloved son and brother." Enji knelt down and placed a single white flower on the stone. She stayed there for a long time, her hand resting on the cool surface, her eyes closed. She did not speak. There were no words that needed saying. The fleet she had commanded, the blockade she had broken, the lives she had protected, those were her words. They always had been. She had been offered the rank of Grand Admiral upon her return, the highest military position in the United Earth Navy. She had declined. She told the council that her place was with the Harong fleet, and that she would remain there until she was no longer able to serve. The council did not argue. They understood. Captain Yoon Do-hyun received his promotion quietly, as he did everything. He was given command of a new dreadnought under construction, the HSS Gwanggato, named after an ancient Korean king who had expanded his kingdom's borders, not through cruelty, but through strength and wisdom. The ship would take 2 years to complete. Do-hyun said he would wait. Lieutenant Park Soo-jin told him, the day the promotion came through, that the construction crew had already painted a white tiger on the new ship's hull. Do-hyun looked at her, and for the second time in their years of service together, she saw something in his expression that surprised her. This time, it was not relief. It was pride. On New Busan, life returned to something like normal, but not quite the same normal as before. The fields were planted again. The markets reopened. Children went back to school. But there was something new in the air, something that had not been there before the blockade. A feeling that the people of this small farming world were not alone, and had never been alone, even when the sky was full of enemies. Baek-jeon reopened her classroom on a bright morning 3 weeks after the Droven left. She had expected maybe 20 students. 43 showed up. Families that had been planning to leave the colony had changed their minds. New families had arrived from other worlds, drawn by the feeling that New Busan was a place worth staying. In the colony's central square, the community erected a simple statue. It was not a soldier. It was not a warship. It was a woman holding a child, both of them looking up at the sky. The plaque at its base read 4 words that made Jeon cry the first time she saw them. They came for us. She brought her students to see it on a field trip. They stood around it in a half-circle, looking up at the bronze faces, and one of them, the same little boy who had tugged her sleeve and asked whose ships were in the sky, raised his hand. "Teacher, will they come again, if someone tries to hurt us again?" Jeon looked at him, then up at the clear blue sky where the stars were invisible in the daylight, but no less present. "They will always come." Months later, at a reception on Threshold Station, a young alien diplomat from a small and unimportant species approached Ambassador Oh Sun-ho. She was nervous, her translator flickering as she tried to find the right words. Finally, she asked the question that half the galaxy wanted to ask. "Is it true? Your people built that fleet in secret for 100 years and never used it? Not once? Not until someone threatened your civilians?" Sun-ho looked at her. He was a patient man, a kind man, the sort of man who believed that the best diplomacy was simply telling the truth and letting it do its own work. He thought about the question for a moment. About the Black Cradle. About the engineers who spent their lives in darkness, building something they hoped would never fly. About a 19-year-old girl named Unji, who enlisted the morning after she lost her brother. About a schoolteacher who refused to leave her students. He smiled gently and said, "We always hoped we would never have to, but hope was never our only plan." The young diplomat stared at him for a long time. Then she bowed, a gesture of deep respect in her culture, and walked away without another word. Outside the station's windows, the stars burned cold and bright and endless. Somewhere out there, the Harang fleet was already back in the dark, hidden and silent and waiting. Not because humanity wanted war, but because humanity understood something that the Droven and so many others had failed to grasp, that peace is not the absence of strength. Peace is what strong people choose when they have every reason not to. The galaxy watched, the galaxy remembered, and humanity was never underestimated again.